start any rumors in Roswell, nothing happened out here. And he said, if you do, you know, it'd be real serious problems. And then, so I just, being as my character was at that time, I said, I'm a civilian, you can go to hell. And that's where he said, you may be the one going to hell. And that's when he really told me, he said, somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand if you do that. So, and I never had. Well, it didn't look like a plane crash. It didn't look like aluminum or you burn aluminum, because I've seen a lot of that in stainless steel. But what it looked like, of course, it didn't have any in those days. What it looked like more, it was a real light gray, almost to white. And some of it was a real dark gray, but it looked more like what fiberglass might look like today. And it wasn't dent or anything, and there wasn't any dents, but what it was is in pieces looked like it had been twisted and shredded and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't see any real sharp dents. Of course, I didn't stand there and look at it either, you know. It's just what I noticed on the way going out. But I know it was very thin. I could see that it was very, very thin. So I didn't want to embarrass my family for the first place. Next thing, being in the mortuary business is not an easy business. And I didn't want to embarrass the funeral home. I didn't want to embarrass, my father was an old contractor, and I didn't want to embarrass him, because if I'd have come out who was an alien, you know, and all this back in those days, hell, they would have laughed me out of town. My folks knew. I thought it would be very embarrassing. And I didn't want it. Mainly, I idolized my father, and I didn't want to embarrass him, because he and I was very, very close. And I was told, one of those sergeants out there said, well, let him go. Hell, nobody's going to believe him anyway. Nobody's going to believe this anyway. So, but that didn't have anything to do with it. It was my family that I wanted to protect and the funeral business.
The story that I put out was very simple. It was what Colonel Blanchard said he wanted put into a press release. When the colonel tells the first lieutenant almost verbatim what he wants in a press release, guess what he gets? You don't argue with him and say, oh, I think it'd sound better if we said it this way or the next way. The answer to all was, yes, sir.
So what exactly did the press release say?
In essence, it was very simple, to the effect that we had in our possession a flying saucer. It was found on a ranch up north of Roswell. It was being flown to General Ramey's office, that being the next higher command. That was the 8th Air Force, and that was the end of it. Information that I got was given to me almost verbatim by Colonel Blanchard, and he read off of a scratch pad that he had in front of him what he was saying to me, and I was writing it down, and after we got all through with it, I kind of awed, and he said, I want you to give it to the local newspapers and radio stations and do it post-haste. And all he got in reply was a yes, sir, and away I went. I meant that they put all the hunks and pieces in I think it was at that time, C-54 aircraft that they loaded up primarily with the material, and that the airplane was flown. The material was not flown. But boy, I got call after call after call. How did that was pretty well orchestrated. I think the thought of handling it that way came down from Washington through channels, and we were told that we were all wrong, that it was just a weather balloon, and that was the only thing that I think we heard was, well, that's the end of that story. Shouldn't have printed all that to start with, and this type of thing. These things happen when you've got a whole bunch of rank going way above you, and you're just a little first lieutenant down on the bottom of the pile.
Yeah. Now, was there any...
I think more than anything else, I was saying, oh God, I hope that this thing doesn't blow up in our face. And that was so easy. Some of these things that would come to the fore in the military, they just got out of hand, and I was just hoping that this would be one that would pleasantly bury itself.
And that's because of the...
I think that there was lots and lots of cover-up. I can't verify that. My sincere feeling is that the thing was something from outer space, and we decided that, I say we, the military decided that our public may not accept it very graciously. Something coming from outer space and hitting our own Earth, it's a little bit hard to get a lot of the people to accept it.
So you think that
I think that they could come out with every word about it and every description today, and the public would say, well, oh, I've seen that. I remember something about how was Popeye cartoon doing? And I'm using that as from one extreme to the other. Today, people don't care that much about something that happened 50 years ago.
So these vehicles would receive the electrical power similar to how a radio receives music.
And the source for power generation?
Many reasons. One, you would never have to refuel because you would get a continuous feed of power if necessary. No noise and no pollution. And in fact, the only byproducts is a very trace amount of nitrous oxide and ozone. And that ozone is a very trace amount, but that could be redirected through other means to actually help fill the hole in the ozone layers, which is another technology that we would like to pursue.
So,
Nikola Tesla designed a VTOL, a vertical takeoff and landing vehicle, and it went through the patent stage, and there was actually several articles that were written in Electrical Experimenter and Science and Invention magazine right around 1912 circa. And it wasn't a disc, it was an airfoil design, but it used electrical power.
what was the form of transportation? Was it a combustion of some sort?
It was electrical engines, but the electrical engines were driven by a combustion engine that ran the generators.
Okay, let's move ahead.
There was an agency that was the forerunner to the NSA that when they found out that Tesla had passed away in the Hotel New Yorker, they came in, they had the manager of the hotel open the safe, and they took all of Tesla's papers, including some papers in a box, several boxes that was in Tesla's room. And that technology and what was in those boxes, what was written in those papers, we do not know, and we may not ever know.
So,
Well, Townsend Brown, when he was still in high school, had noticed that when he put some materials together and exposed those materials to voltage, that they would have either less weight or more weight, depending on the electrical configuration. And at that time, no one would listen to him because he was just a kid. And Thomas Townsend Brown did a lot of spectral anomalous studies for the military and mining detection systems for the Navy. And he developed several technologies for submarines and ships to detect mines and minefields. And that led him into many other avenues of laboratory usage and the expertise that he gained using all the equipment in these laboratories that were very well funded right up to the time of the Depression, where everything was cut back, and Thomas Townsend Brown had to become a materials engineer and a soil engineer for a company because of the Great Depression. And again, Thomas Townsend Brown was ridiculed by academia in the science community, and because he was using words like electrogravity. And that's why he came up with terms like dielectric stresses that would cut down the potential ridicule that he would get from using such radical words like anti-gravity or electrogravitic systems.
okay, let's get into this term
Well, that's definitely a very interesting time in Thomas Townsend Brown's life, to say the least. What he had discovered in his experiments, that he found by using very specific kinds of energy on very specific shapes of specific metals would cause those metals to move in controlled directions. And he found that the best shape was disc shape, and like a parabolic or a upside down umbrella. And he found that by specifically arranging the conductors and the charge and the polarity and the spacing between the two, it would cause more or less of an effect. And the analogy was, and when it was sufficiently charged over 15,000 volts, it would cause the disc to move. And he first noticed this effect when he was experimenting with high voltage capacitors. And he noticed that the wires on the capacitor leads, the negative lead would jump to the positive lead. And he refined that effect and found, in fact, that the disc shape worked the best to make this effect more pronounced. So the analogy, and he made several different devices, some of which were up to 3 feet in diameter. And Thomas Townsend Brown, having a pretty extensive background with the military and R&D, and being a good patriot, saw it his duty to bring this to the Air Force and to do a demonstration. And when they did this demonstration for the Air Force, it instantly went classified under Project Winterhaven, and Brown was never allowed to talk about it publicly ever again.
So
Yes.
electrokinetic effect is another term for it. Is this applicable to advanced propulsion systems?
Absolutely. In fact, it was accidentally released by Jane's Aviation Weekly magazine, that the B-2 stealth bomber has a secondary drive system. Now they have twin GE jet turbine engines on them. But there's some facts that were released by accident, and those facts are that the leading edge of the B-2 stealth bomber is positively charged. The wings of the B-2 stealth bomber are doped with depleted uranium. Now, one thing that most people don't know about depleted uranium is that it has the highest dielectric constant known to man, period. And the exhaust of the B-2 stealth bomber is negatively charged. So it is the T. Townsend Brown effect at work. So when they get up to a certain speed, they can feather back the jet engines, engage the electric drive, and it goes. Now, I don't know if it'll ever be declassified, but it does all fit. And we're working on a model of the B-2 to try to duplicate it to see if, in fact, that is a viable source of propulsion in a wing shape.
Did Townsend Brown...
It's real interesting that you mentioned UFOs and T. Townsend Brown. T. Townsend Brown, most people don't know this, but he was the founder of NICAP, which is one of the first UFO organizations.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just pause.
Pause for a sec.
This kind of technology needs to be dealt with wisdom and understanding and shouldn't be abused.
How are we doing?
The thing that really overwhelmed me was that I found photographs and videotape of the same style, or maybe even the same saucer, if you will, from all over the world, from people that don't even know each other. And that right there is overwhelming evidence, as far as I'm concerned. The same craft or same style craft had been filmed from different parts of the world with people that have no contact with each other whatsoever within the same day, of the same month, of the same year, is just overwhelming. And someone that doesn't believe in the UFO phenomena simply hasn't done their homework. The next step was for me to go from gatherer to investigator. And then I wanted to look for common denominators, because I then became, the scientist in me came out. I wanted to know how these things worked. And in order to do that, you have to gather more information and look for common denominators. And that's when I saw that no matter what kind of saucer or what kind of bell-shaped device or what kind of craft it was, they had many common denominators, and that there was a main body of the disc, there was some kind of decorative ring, and a little dome or section on top, and usually some sort of little antenna or spike, if you will, on the top. And then the testimonies from the people, that there were signaling lights at the trailing rim, that they felt cold, that they smelt that electrolytic burn smell, like corona in the air. And those were all symptoms of high voltage. So I literally started to take pieces of conductive metals and put them together in different configurations and expose high voltage to them just to see what they would do. And I would use different high voltage devices, AC and DC. I found DC and electrostatics were the best, and the effect was more pronounced, where I actually had movement by exposing voltage to these models that I made. And in one of the models, I got the tester Bob Lazar sport model, which is right here. And this has all the characteristics of almost every UFO craft except for the cylindrical type style. You have the main parabolic, the main body of the ship, the decorative rings, the dome on top with the little windows, and some sort of little spike on top. Well, when I exposed high voltage to this, I had corona, like bright flickering lights. So those aren't signaling lights. That's an electrical corona discharge, because electrons will build up on the sharpest outmost point on a conductor. And that this isn't a decorative ring, that is a dielectric. These are insulators. And this isn't a cockpit, and those aren't windows. This is a positively charged conductive surface. And it's the premise that I discovered is that when you positively charge the top part and it's insulated by these rings and the body's negatively charged, it creates electromotive force in the vertical configuration, causing lift. And it works. And it can be duplicated. And it was brought to my attention that this is very much like a doctor named Townsend Brown. So I got involved in the research of Townsend Brown, and I found that he was completely parallel, 100%, as to the electromotive forces. And he was, in one of the videos in his laboratory, you could see on the blackboard behind him a cross-sectional drawing of the George Adamski saucer. So he had a great interest in UFOs as well, and wanted to have a logical, reasonable explanation for how the craft may work. So it took a lot of wind out of my sails, but